So we all know that Redfall is just not a very good game. However, we just found out why it's not a very good game, and the story is not great. Basically, this is a story of corporate greed, of mismanagement, and of a company that didn't really know what they were making or why they were making it. Strap in, this one's a little crazy. The story comes from Bloomberg, specifically from the one and only Jason Schreier, and I'll have this linked below in the description and pinned comment if you want to read it for yourself. Arkane is a studio that was founded back in 1999, and they built a reputation for creating some phenomenally well-designed, immersive sim games, specifically ones that focused on tight, intricate level design with extremely robust mechanics to encourage you to explore in different ways. Seriously, if you have not played the Dishonored games, you are missing out. Those are an absolute gem, and there's a reason why people expected Redfall to at least be decent, because this is a team that knows what they're doing. Now, to break things down a little bit more specifically, there are two teams within Arkane. There is Arkane Lyon in France, and there's Arkane Austin. Now, it's not exactly clear how many employees each of these studios have, but they're decent sized studios with at least 100 employees working on each of their games. Now, Redfall was developed by Arkane Austin down in Texas. This is the same team that built Prey, which was highly praised by critics, and of course helped on the original Dishonored. The reason I say helped is because Dishonored was actually developed by both Arkane Lyon and Arkane Austin together. They didn't really separate until after that, doing different projects at the same time. So they helped, but I mean, it was basically a 50-50 thing. For all intents and purposes, they developed Dishonored and Prey, both of which were reviewed very, very highly by critics, though Dishonored 2 and Prey were considered financial flops. They were great with critics, but in terms of actual revenue, they didn't do that well. Now, Prey launched in 2017, and after its less than stellar launch financially, it was decided by corporate executives within ZeniMax that they needed to reevaluate what their mission was going to be and how they were going to start generating actual profits for the company. Now, quick rewind back to 2018. I made some videos where I was looking at Fallout 76, trying to figure out why on earth the game was so greedy from the ground up. I mean, the entire thing was built just to milk money from customers without even so much as a slight consideration for the quality of the product they were delivering. It was borderline evil what they did with Fallout 76. Can you believe that Bethesda doesn't talk to me or respond to my emails for review codes or anything anymore? Yeah, no, well, what they did was evil. I'm going to call it like it is. It was evil. They tried to steal your money, basically, repeatedly. I mean, just go watch the internet historian video on the whole situation. It's insane that anybody defends BGS after that. Anyway, what I determined was that because the management hadn't changed within Bethesda and ZeniMax, their parent company, something had shifted. If the managers are the same, there hasn't been a change up in terms of who's making the decisions. When there are major shifts in priorities and goals for a company, you have to consider that maybe the motivation has changed. Maybe the goal has changed. Because if for 20 years a company runs a certain way and then without management changing, they all of a sudden start acting like a totally different company, you have to wonder, what are the owners actually trying to do now that they weren't trying to do before? In other words, they got so greedy, the only explanation was that they were trying to boost their revenue numbers to look more appealing, to get more money from a potential acquisition. Something that was doubled up because there was a bunch of reporting of ZeniMax talking with various people, investment companies, to potentially sell off a chunk of their holdings within ZeniMax, or to just entirely be absorbed into a larger corporate structure, which is of course what eventually happened when Microsoft announced that they were buying them and bringing ZeniMax into the Xbox fold. Now I know what you're thinking, what does this have to do with Redfall? Well, back in 2018, executives within ZeniMax, the parent company of Bethesda Softworks, and them being the parent company of Arkane, they decided that they needed to start really pushing live service games, games that would turn a profit over the long run through selling cosmetics, microtransactions, the whole kit and caboodle. Again, 2018 was the same year that Fallout 76 launched, so it makes sense that they would come up with this idea of forcing Arkane to finally turn a profit by developing something that was built from the ground up to squeeze money out of players. Going back to the article, according to people familiar with the process, ZeniMax was strongly urging developers at its subsidiaries to implement microtransactions, that is, recurrent opportunities within games for players to spend real money, say, outfitting their characters. Although this wasn't an absolute mandate, several ZeniMax franchises such as Fallout, Doom, and Wolfenstein would soon release new versions incorporating online multiplayer and monetization options. Again, we saw this happening in real time where out of nowhere, all of these studios that were previously making really high quality single player content were coming out with multiplayer games, games with co-op, and games with in-game shops. This wasn't because the devs all of a sudden decided to do it. It's because the guys upstairs, not God, the managers, sort of God, they decided that they wanted this to happen and that they needed to boost those numbers so when they finally sold, they could get as many billions as they could. Now, when it finally came time to develop Redfall, they tapped two very respected developers, Harvey Smith and Ricardo Beret. I'm assuming Beret. It might just be Bar or Bear. I don't know. Beret sounds more interesting, so I'm going to go with that. And these guys had previously worked on the Dishonored series and Prey. If anybody could get this new game working, it would probably be them. After some ideation, they settled on the concept of a game where multiple players would be in a team together in a co-op adventure game where you slay and battle vampires and pay for cosmetic upgrades. Developers under Smith and Beret said the two leads were outwardly excited, but as the project progressed, they failed to provide clear direction. Staff members also said that over time they grew frustrated with management's frequent shifting references to other games such as Far Cry and Borderlands, and that left each department with varying ideas of what exactly they were making. Throughout the development, the fundamental tension between single player and multiplayer design remained unresolved. And again, this can be felt when playing Redfall. It feels like a multiplayer game that wants to be a single player game, and also like a single player game that really wants to be a multiplayer game. It just doesn't feel good to play because it doesn't know what it wants to be. And that's because the developers didn't even know what they wanted it to be. And the description of how management was constantly shifting references to other games such as Far Cry and Borderlands is also very, very visible in the final product. It was also visible in the marketing campaigns and the discussions that the developers had with press leading up to Redfall's launch, where they repeatedly referenced it being like an open world Far Cry game, and then also saying that they'd taken inspiration from games like Borderlands with the weapon customization and things. It was very confusing because none of those ideas really blend together for a good reason. They also described how the studio was regularly understaffed for the project at hand. Again, a reflection of this team's original purpose, which was to develop smaller in-scope single-player games like Prey and Dishonored. Love it or hate it, multiplayer games just take a lot more people. You have to have networking staff that you wouldn't normally have. You have to have staff working full-time just on the infrastructure of the servers to play stuff internationally. It's not as simple as just flipping a switch and making your game multiplayer. It's a huge endeavor. According to the article, ZeniMax's management tried to get help from outside companies, some of which they owned and others that they didn't, but it ultimately didn't really help. And by the end of Redfall's development, as morale continued to suffer and fall, roughly 70% of the staff at Arkane Austin who had worked on Prey were no longer at the company. 70%. And this is something that I frankly had not really thought of or considered, but it makes a lot of sense. I've for years said that when a company that is known for single player games shifts and makes something multiplayer, they will inevitably run into some friction where players that liked their single player stuff will not connect with the multiplayer stuff and they will fall off. You'll lose some fan base as a result of that because they wanted single player stuff. Now they're getting multiplayer. They're not interested. It's exactly what we're seeing happen with BGS when they did Fallout 76. I know. It was BGS Austin, but Jason Schreier, this same guy, also reported that BGS Maryland was much more involved in that game's production than they initially let on, for obvious reasons, because it's a really bad look. But regardless, BGS fans were not that into Fallout 76 because it was not their typical kind of game. And it's the same sort of thing we're seeing happen with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, where it's coming from a team, Rocksteady, which is world-renowned for amazing single-player action-adventure games. And yet now they're developing a really lackluster-looking co-op looter-shooter. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And so the fans are falling off. But what I hadn't considered is that the staff runs into this problem even more so, because they have to work on this for years. If they are a developer that really prides themselves on single player open world design or single player tight, intricate level design like Arkane was known for, and then they're told from management that they need to start working on a generic co-op looter shooter thing that's going to be Far Cry, but also is going to be Borderlands, nobody really knows, I wouldn't blame them at all for leaving and going to another studio somewhere else where they can create games they really want to make and that they're proud of. I mean, just put yourself in their shoes. If you have a lot of talent and there's a lot of companies that would like to hire you, and then you find out that you can either spend 5 years of your life working on something you don't believe in that doesn't seem that good or interesting, or you can go over here and work on something you are excited by that actually looks like it could be special and that you would be hyped to be a part of, I don't blame them for moving from here over there. It makes sense to me. And the real tragedy is that this is how companies and studios fall apart. Arkane Austin is not the same company it was when they built Prey. People are like, oh, just make Prey 2 and everything will be great again. No, 70% of the people that made Prey, the majority, are gone. They've left. They're not coming back willy-nilly. Maybe some of them might if you can offer them higher pay or something, but they're gone. That talent loss is way more devastating in the grand scheme of a company than any sort of sales loss from a game launching a little buggy or from lost microtransactions from a game that wasn't monetized fully. That's something that you can't just repair. And this whole thing just reaffirms the idea that nobody within Arkane was confident that Redfall was going to be good. Everybody that worked on it was kind of dreading its release. And some were even dreading it so much that they left the company entirely and went somewhere else. Another nail in the coffin is this right here. The acquisition of ZeniMax by Xbox and Microsoft gave some staff at Arkane hope that Microsoft might cancel Redfall, or better yet, let them reboot it as a single-player game, according to sources familiar with the production of the game. Instead, Microsoft maintained a hands-off approach, which, let's be clear, I know it's easy to like jump on Xbox and hate on them for this because it's like, oh, they should have gotten involved and seen how broken it was and delayed it or canceled it, whatever. But at the same time, I can respect the management's choice to come into a studio that's operating independently and let them just do what they were doing, not mess with it, not come in and be like, hey, we're Xbox, we're going to do things our way, but just let them make what they were making. I would say they should have still asked around the studio and been like, hey, are you proud of what you're making? What do you think this game's going to turn out like? Blah, blah, blah. And they could have found out real quickly this wasn't going to end well and then cancel it. But you know what? I understand why they wanted hands off. And as the years ticked by, Redfall just kept getting worse and worse. Nobody knew what this game was going to be, and the debut date was pushed back from Halloween of 22 to early 23, and then eventually to May of 23. And all along the way, the upper management were basically telling employees that arcane magic would manifest at the last minute, tie the game together, make it awesome, which, funnily enough, is exactly as he describes here what BioWare was saying in the lead up to Anthem. But it's also exactly the same language that came out of CD Projekt Red when they were developing Cyberpunk 2077. Jason Schreier also wrote a report on that game's development after its troubled launch and described how many managers just kept putting off problems and glitches and things that would pop up and saying, oh, we'll fix them later on. After all, we made The Witcher 3. That was their go-to phrase. It's gonna work out. No way we would launch something buggy and broken. We made The Witcher 3. It's gonna be great. It once again shows that pride really does go before the fall. And in these cases, I don't know if it was pure pride or if it was just delusion or maybe denial, because I have to think that the executives and the lead designers on Redfall and say Anthem knew that that was not ready, that it wasn't going to be received well. They had to know and not honestly believe that this was just going to work out, but who knows? Who knows? Another interesting tidbit in the article is this little bit right here where they describe that for the first 3 years, so from 2018 to 2021, Redfall had significant microtransaction plans in place. Only in 2021, after that 3-year period, with games as a service growing more and more controversial, did Arkane scrap its unwieldy in-game monetization plans, which already Redfall has been designed to have multiple playable characters. They've already said, I don't know if they canceled this, but they said in the lead up to launch that there were going to be more playable characters available after launch for additional purchase. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see if they continue that, but I can't imagine what that in-game store must have looked like before they cut it out. But this just goes to show you again that once you design a game around live service, you can't just rip it out and make it okay. People have been really worried about Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League because it looks like it's been built from the ground up to just milk money out of people as best they can. And people have been hoping that maybe they go back in and they cut it out. They just delayed it to next year. So maybe that's what they're doing. They're just stripping all of it. But let's be honest, they're not doing that. And even if they did, and they were able to get rid of all of that stuff and completely delete the in-game store, blah, 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 it wouldn't frankly matter. Because when a game is designed for microtransactions, for XP boosts, for loot boxes that give you crafting materials, you can't just take that system away and expect the game to be fun or interesting, because all of these systems are built from the ground up. If the foundation is cracked or if the house is built on sand, the entire thing is going to collapse no matter how many rocks you put in and dig out the sand and try to make it solid again. It just won't work. But all told, Redfall is just a prime example of short-sighted managers trying to quickly cash out. That's what this was. The leadership over at ZeniMax decided they needed to milk all of their franchises as dry as they possibly could to boost those revenue numbers for the acquisition that they were looking to complete. And it worked. They got billions for the company and they left and rode off into the sunset. Some of them passed away within just a few months. Some of them are still rocking and rolling now. But their whole plan was to sell out their own company in order to get out with the biggest payday possible. And when that happens, you can see just how short-sighted it is. They drove the reputation of the Fallout brand into the dirt. They nearly destroyed the reputation of one of their most prized developers, Bethesda Game Studios. They set Arkane up for absolute abject failure with this game, and a bunch of their other studios released their worst-rated games in a decade because they were forced to put out these multiplayer games that nobody really wanted. And while we look at that and say, what on earth were they thinking? What was Arkane thinking putting it together something like Redfall? What was Bethesda thinking putting something together like Fallout 76? From our perspective, it doesn't make sense. But from the perspective of the owners of ZeniMax, it makes perfect sense. What they did, milking all of these franchises dry and really in many cases setting up their own studios for failure in the long term by losing talent, they were able to get out of Dodge with an extra $1 billion, with an extra 500 million or something. We don't know what they would have been offered for ZeniMax before they boosted revenue numbers these way. Who knows? Maybe they would have been offered 5 billion, maybe 6. Maybe it would have been the same or maybe more because the reputation wouldn't have been tarnished. But what we do know is that it seems to have worked. The management sold. They were able to move on, buy their super yachts, retire in the Maldives. I don't know where they went. But they got out. They got what they wanted. It cost them everything, but they did it. And listen, I have a bachelor's degree in corporate finance. It's no mystery that I appreciate what businesses can do for individuals, but I also have seen the nitty-gritty of how terrible business can go when in the hands of amoral and, let's just say, managers who lack conscience and a care for their human employees. And I think ZeniMax is a great example of a company that frankly didn't give a crap about the studios, the employees. They were just trying to maximize the bottom line so they could get out with as fat a stack as they possibly could. And I find that really, really detestable. If ZeniMax had been publicly traded, I don't think they would have done all of these types of things, because their goal would be to maximize shareholder value. They wouldn't have tried to destroy the long-term reputation of their studios just for a quick benefit of a potential merger or acquisition. Sometimes they still do that. We've seen that a few times with some other companies. But in general, managers try to do what's best for the long term when there is a public interest or a broader interest from shareholders. But in this case, because ZeniMax was privately held, all bets were off. And they made decisions that harmed thousands and thousands of people because 10 people wanted to get out and make big bucks from Microsoft. And you know, it's just a tragic tale, really. At the end of the day, Arkane Austin will never be the same. Companies like BGS will never be the same, and I think that's just frankly tragic. But you know what isn't tragic? A new t-shirt from LukeStevensTV.com. Check them out right now. We have a brand new one, Hype Makes You Stupid, which is one of my personal favorites. I've been wearing this one the last couple days. I forgot to put it on for this video. I'm very sorry. We also have a Proud Skeptic mug, Skeptic tee. This one, I'm not cynical, I'm skeptical, and a bunch of other stuff if you're interested, even 16 times the detail merch as well. And also, if you order a t-shirt or any of these things, I will send you a personalized little video on my phone sitting here in the studio or on my back porch, wherever I am, just saying thank you. It's kind of like a cameo. So 2 for 1. But you know what? That's going to do it for me. Let me know what you think of all of this Redfall madness. I think the game is not great, but with patches, a little TLC, I think they could eventually get to the point where it's maybe like a 6.57 out of 10. I don't think it's really like a 50s, which is where it is now. I mean, right now it's rated 56 out of 100, which puts it at a lower score than Blood Bowl 3, which is amazing. But I don't know. What do you think? Is Redfall a hidden gem? Is it going to get better with time, or is it just a lemon? Is it just, I was going to say a turd, but I couldn't find a redeeming quality in a turd. Is it just not good? Is it just not good? Let me know what you think. Also, a heads up, videos might be a little inconsistent for the next couple of weeks because we have another baby due very soon, like literally any day. So if I miss a Monday or Friday upload, it's probably because a baby is here and I'm frantically trying to juggle that. So wish me luck. But with that, thank you for watching. I love you all. Thanks for making my dream a reality, being able to provide for my family, doing what I love. This is actually a dream come true, like not just turn a phrase. This is like a dream I had and it's real. So thank you. I love you dearly. And I'll see you in the next one. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye.